When he came, he was looking much in a hurry. He was uncomfortable.
I sat there believing that the people he served diligently could not hurt him.
He made the announcement that Dr. Ouko had been found.
The students were shouting that you killed Ouko, you burnt Ouko, now eat him.
And we made it clear to those people that Dr. Ouko was murdered.
And she realized, and she asked me if I knew anything about the minister. I did not hesitate.
"25 years ago, the country saw the brutal murder of a sitting cabinet minister. The remains of Dr. John Robert Ouko were discovered 7 kilometers away from his home in Koru. In a 4-part case file special series, we trace the last moments of Kenya's Foreign Affairs Minister.
Wakati mwili ilipatikana ya Dr. Robert Ouko, nilikuwa kwa ng'ambo hii.
We traveled the world to speak to those arrested and charged for his murder.
I had no reason to kill the minister.
We exposed a deliberate scheme by government officials to cover up his murder.
It was obvious the scene had been set up, there's no doubt about that.
And documents the killing of witnesses and accomplices to his murder.
Those keys were under my custody.
But first, Case Files, Ouko is Dead, starts now. The story of Dr. John Robert Ouko has been told through the tears of his family members. The eyes of hundreds of people knew the Foreign Affairs Minister, those who worked with him, those who were arrested and prosecuted for his murder, to those who knew something about his murder but were never questioned about it. The story of a man described by many as a civil servant has been retold for more than 2 decades now. His murder has remained unresolved. Robert Ouko's story has a lot to do with the hills of Gotalila, hills named after a resident of Moroni town, home to an articulate Foreign Affairs Minister, home to a husband. Ouko's 52 years alive are frozen in time and pushed to a prominent corner in a library built and named after him. Robert Ouko traveled the world, played politics, but a brutal assassination stopped him in his tracks in what many say will have been a brilliant political career. "25 years later, Case Files reopens the Dr. Robert Ouko murder file, travels the world to speak to those framed up for his murder, to those who attempted to investigate it. Robert Ouko rose to become a cabinet minister in President Daniel Moi's government, where he landed the lucrative and prestigious docket of foreign affairs. Ouko was a staunch supporter and member of the ruling political party KANU and had great admiration for his party boss, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. All appears to have been well until the minister joined the then President Daniel Moi for a trip to the United States of America. On the 27th of January 1990, President Moi, together with a delegation of 83 other officials and ministers, left Nairobi to travel via London on a private visit to attend a prayer breakfast meeting in Washington, D.C. The delegation was seen off at the airport by the then Minister of Finance, Professor George Saitoti. On the plane were the then Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. John Robert Ouko, Energy Minister Nicholas Biwott, the Minister for Industry, Dalmas Otieno, Professor Sam Ongeri, the Minister in charge of Technical Training and Applied Technology, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Bethwell Kiplagat, and the Permanent Secretary for Internal Security, Ezekiel Yugi. While on the US tour, just like other ministers who accompanied the president, Robert Ouko and Nicholas B. Ward shared a hotel. In fact, during their stay in Washington, the two were assigned one vehicle to use. The Kenya delegation arrived back at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport on a Kenya Airways flight on February 4th, 1990. Dr. Ouko returned to his Loresho home at about 6 p.m. that night and later in the evening paid a visit the Internal Security Permanent Secretary, Ezekiel Yugi. The following morning, the Foreign Affairs Minister was back at State House, Nairobi, where he presented the incoming Japanese and Canadian ambassadors to President Moi. Ouko will reportedly be given some time off by his boss and headed to his rural home in Koru. Ouko's next official assignment was a trip to Gambia. His bodyguard will later tell the police that the minister was carrying some files and stopped over in Gilgil to buy medicine before being driven home. The minister was complaining of a headache.
I got a call from my city editor, Mutegi Njao. It was around 5 p.m. telling me to be on standby because the information that Ouko is missing. And Mutegi asked me, "Do you think the man is alive?" I said, "Well, from what I've heard and what I've heard on radio, I don't think he's alive." Somebody said, "Well, let's cross our fingers."
The news came up that Ouko was missing. It was on the media that Robert Ouko was missing. So I told my bureau chief, who was Noel Okoth, that, hey, we were with Robert over the weekend at the function in Imperial Hotel. How can a whole minister disappear without the government knowing? And this is a guy who has a whole entourage of security. How could he disappear like that?
The national broadcaster KBC had carried President Daniel Moi's message to the public. The president had sent out an appeal about his missing minister. Moi wanted anyone with information about his missing minister to notify the police.
An hour and a half later, about 6:30, I got another call from the group managing editor, the late Anthony Mbugus, asking me to jump into a matatu because Nation didn't have a bureau vehicle to go to Ouko's home in Koru.
And so we went up to Koru to find out what was happening. And people started coming home. That was the time the issue of, it became intense that there was something wrong.
It was now becoming apparent that the minister was not just missing. The family was hoping for the best as the country prepared for the worst. On the morning of the 13th of February 1990, the country's attention was trained on the hills of Gotalila.
And we were told there is a hard boy who saw the body of Ouko, that Ouko's body has been found somewhere near Gotalila, at the foot of Gotalila. So we rushed to that place to find out what was happening. We never saw the boy. The boy was only seen by the security guys, and we never saw him.
We had groups of policemen, APs, GSU moving in different directions. So I found myself wondering because we didn't know what we were looking for.
A search party stumbled upon the remains of a human being. Caleb Atemi was among the first journalists on the scene.
The charred remains of the late Ouko was still smoldering. So I stood there in a daze. Of course, mentally I was consuming, I was absorbing the items that lay there beside the body. I could visually recognize from the skull is the Ouko that I knew. His hands, his limbs were broken. They were all burned and broken into pieces of black bones. We had a thick layer of ash around his midriff. It had been burned completely.
Around, they told us, you will just see the place place, but you'll never take a photo. So you are given, actually, I remember, each and every photographer who was there had about 2 or 3 security guys, the GSU guys and the normal senior policemen. So, like for example, I think I had about three security guys. As we were walking around there, they were just next to me. I could not carry camera up.
The country erupted.
Tulitambua kwamba huyu ni Ouko. Alikuwa na sura yake kamili. Kwa sababu aliungua, lakini sura yake haikuungua. Iliungua tu lakini imebambuka sasa. Lakini sura yake ilikuwa inaweza kuonekana kwamba ako ni yeye mwenyewe. Basi mapolisi akasema kwamba huyu ni Ouko. Amejiua mwenyewe. Mwingine alisema amejiua, mwingine akasema kwamba ulijuaje kwamba amejiua? Hasa mimi nikasikiza vile walivyokuwa wakisema. Nikasema kwamba wewe unasema kwamba amejiua. Anaweza kutoka kwake aende ajiua huko. Kwa makosa gani?
Kenya was on edge. I think the authoritarian regime had sat on people for so long. People were waiting for an excuse to vent out the anger. So people are demanding for pluralism. Moi was hard in allowing it to work. So I think Ouko was a spark that the wananchi and civil society required. So once the spark was lit, there was no turning back. It was chaos.
University students were the first out on the streets.
The worst riots were in Kisumu City. I recall GSU. I've never seen such large contingent of police and GSU anywhere, anytime in this country.
The government announced that no effort will be spared in bringing to book the perpetrators of the grisly murder of the cabinet minister. The discovery will later kick off a series of questions: who withdrew the minister's 4 armed bodyguards at his home in Koru, and why did the minister end up dead 7 kilometers away? Who wanted the foreign affairs minister dead, and why? The government put up an image of a system that was ready to investigate and bring to book the perpetrators of a high-profile minister. But privately, some individuals in the same government worked round the clock to frustrate the murder probe.